We've got two really experienced media practitioners with us today who are going to share their insights on the art of media engagement. I'm delighted to welcome Marcia Dixon and Michael Wakelin. They'll both introduce themselves when they come to talk to us. How I'm planning to run it is that I'm going to hand over to Marcia first, who's going to give her presentation, and then we'll have a few questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat, and then we'll go to Michael, and then we'll have a little wrap up at the end where people can ask their other questions. Any concerns or worries, put those in the chat as well. So I'm delighted to hand over to Marcia Dixon, PR expert, and one of the leading PR practitioners who works with faith, particularly the Black churches in the UK. So over to you, Marcia.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to share my presentation. I hope that you can all see it. Can you all see it? Okay, great stuff. Great stuff. So good afternoon, everyone, again. And I'm just going to be talking about the art of media engagement, getting stories in the media. I'm sure that when Michael follows me, he'll be able to provide much more detail about media engagement. But here's my presentation. So you might be thinking, who am I? Sarah just gave you a brief snapshot, gave you my name and some of the things that I do. I'm the founder of an organization called MD Public Relations, which was set up, I think, about 14 years ago to provide PR services to Black churches so that they engage much more effectively with the media. I'm the editor of a faith-based magazine called Keep the Faith. It's predominantly about what's happening in the Black faith community, but I do have stories from other faith communities, Christian faith communities as well. I worked as a religious journalist at The Voice, which was Britain's leading, or is Britain's leading Black newspaper. I was there for about 3 decades. I loved my job writing about what was happening within the Black Christian community. That's the Pentecostal community, as well as Christians in other church organizations. I'm founder of a women's ministry breakfast and also some music seminars. And I used to organize an event called the Wise Women Awards that recognizes the contributions of Christian women in the church and society. Recipients have included Bishop Rosemary Mallett, the first ever female bishop of Croydon, and Karen Gibson, whose choir performed at the royal wedding. I'm a recipient of a legacy award for service to the faith community. You know that when you get a legacy award that you're kind of a certain age. And I also received an MBE for interfaith relations. These are some of my clients. Some of them are secular clients, but I've worked with numerous Christian organizations, Christian Aid, World Vision, worked for street pastors at its inception. I was actually in the room when Reverend Les Isaacs, David Shoshania, and Ian Critchlow decided that they wanted to form a organization that provided support to vulnerable youth. That was 20 years ago. And I started working for them, offered my services voluntarily because I really did believe in that mission. And I have seen that organization kind of grow from those 3 individuals in the room to now that it's Street Pastors is based in 250 towns and cities around the UK, as well as established abroad. New Testament Church of God, Tear Fund, and some praise and worship artists I've worked for also. I just thought it would be good just to drop in what is media. I'm sure that you all know, but it's always good to be reminded that media describes any channel of communication. This can include anything from printed paper to digital data and encompasses art, news, educational content, and numerous other forms of information. It's just a channel that media is channels that people use to share information. One thing that I do, I regularly do PR workshops for churches, because in the Black community, there was a time where Christian community was kind of quite fearful of the media. And as far as I'm concerned, there is a biblical imperative for the Christian community to engage in the media. And I'm just going to read this scripture. The Bible says, you are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp, then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. I think for me personally, I think it's fantastic when you see stories about what the church is doing in the media, because people have, oftentimes people don't often get to engage with churches. So when there's stories about good news and the good things that the church is doing, what God is doing in people's lives, it just gives the church an opportunity to once again shine and let people know that it's here and that God is moving in people's lives. And the other verse that I'm going to use is taken from Romans 10:14, and it's basically saying, how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? That is why the scripture says, how beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news. The church is about good news. The media is a channel through which we can share that good news. So I think it's so important that we understand how to utilize media communication tools in order to get our message out and get our stories out. So before anyone engages with media, I think it's so important to ask yourself, why do you want to engage with the media? Is it to increase awareness of what you do, raise your profile, promote an initiative, reach new audience, influence public opinion? I know that when I started off doing street pastors, basically what I wanted to, what I focused on was increasing awareness, increasing understanding that the church was concerned about the issue of gun and knife crime, which was the case back then, and that they wanted to do something about it. And I also utilized the media to actually promote their initiative when they kind of launched the street pastors in Brixton and Hackney 20 years ago. So the question you need to ask yourself is, why do you want to engage the media? There's all different types of media: newspaper, radio, TV, magazines, websites, and increasingly podcasts as well. They're all fantastic mediums to use in order to get your stories out. And I should really have listed social media as well. That's a really good place to get your stories out, because sometimes what happens, you might put up a post or you might put up a story, and people in newspaper, radio, TV, magazine, website media actually see your post and contact you because they actually want to feature you or your story or what you featured in your post in their media. I said at the beginning, I actually edit a magazine, and there's been times when I've been scrolling through social media and I've seen things that grab my attention, and I actually get in contact with the person who's posted that to actually do a story. The last time I did that was at the beginning of the year, where I saw someone post a story about their mother celebrating her 100th birthday, and I got in contact, and two amazing things happened. One, I made contact with somebody I knew from many years ago, didn't realize this woman was her mother, and in learning about this lady, I found out, one, that she was a founding member of a congregation in Stafford, and secondly, she was a good friend of the founding member of the New Testament Church of God UK. So yeah, so do post, be intentional about your social media posts, because you never know who's reading, you never know whose interest you could spark. So what type of stories do the media cover? And I know that most of the people in this room are people that are part of ecumenical organizations, and you're kind of thinking about how can the media engage with the stories that with the activities and things that we do in our ecumenical organizations. Well, these are the kind of stories that will spark media interest. History making stories. Some of these are stories that I've worked on. Some of them I just made up to just give you an idea. So for instance, I worked for the media company that did the PR for a church called Kingsway International Christian Center. When the church was opened several years ago, it was the largest church to open in Britain for 100 years because it was a 4,000-seater building. Another history-making story. This one I made up, which is the first woman of color walks across the Antarctic. These kinds of stories will generate generate media interest. There's human interest stories. They're just kind of stories about things that happen to people. So this story, boy writes book about dealing with mum's cancer. An 8-year-old boy shared his feelings about his mum getting cancer. BBC Songs of Praise actually interviewed the mother and the boy. Woman wins Best Teacher Award. Those kind of stories normally get into local media. Story of notable achievement. Business coach voted LinkedIn top voice. This lady, she is a business coach. She was voted about 5 years ago LinkedIn Voice of the Year. That's LinkedIn, the social media platform. The story was featured in her local paper, and I think it was featured in some of the Black ethnic papers as well. And as a result of doing that, and as a result of her getting that accolade, she's also been called upon several times by the BBC to contribute to stories about women and business. Gospel singer received OBE. In 2020, a gospel artist called Moiwa received an OBE. I know that generated some media coverage for him. And then there's entertainment stories. I'm not really going to go into those. And then here's some more stories that media could cover, and maybe these are related to some I've tried to get angles that relate to where you are. So for instance, how faith community is helping people in cost of living crisis. This might be something that a local newspaper could pick up, or even a local TV station, like BBC London or what have you. They've done a lot of stories about food banks and stuff. Another story, local ecumenical charity raises money for children's charity. And political story, faith leaders support climate change advocates. I'm sure that you're all aware last year, Reverend Les Isaacs spoke at the prayer breakfast in the House of Commons, I believe it is. And as a result of his talk, the then Home Secretary decided to resign because Les's message was about integrity. That story got a lot of coverage in Christian media. I'm not too sure about its traction in the the national media. So how do you engage media? How do you get the attention of journalists? I think it's always good to sort of like have a list. Well, I put it in this list to create a media list. That should have gone to the top, really. Create a list of the media that you'd like to get in, and also be aware of the media that feature religious stories. So like I've got a list of about 30 media that are focused particularly on religious media. And I've also got the names of religious journalists from the national newspapers. So it's good to compile a media list with their name and their email addresses and their phone number if you can get it. It's good to follow journalists on social media. Twitter is the main platform for journalists, but they can be found on every social media platform. I think, like I said earlier, I think it makes sense to be strategic with your social media posts. Even myself, I'm on social media a lot. I've actually got a job a writing job as a result of a media post that I wrote. So, you know, think carefully sometimes about what you actually post. People are watching, people are reading. I think it's good to create and send out press releases. Press releases give people a snapshot of your story. I remember when I was working on the Kingsway International Christian Centre story. Prior to that, we sent out some press releases, which no one took any notice of. However, when we sent out the press release about the church being the largest church to open for 100 years, the phones couldn't stop ringing. Guardian, Sky, ITV, etc., because it was a good press release, but the headline was catching as well. It's good to pitch story ideas, i.e. possible stories the media outlet can cover. Sometimes it's good to offer to guest write a column or an article, because you know there might be a burning issue. You know, you get in contact with the editor of that section and ask them if they would be happy to accept an article from you. People have done that to me. People do that in other publications. And sending a letter to the editor about a pertinent issue, that can really be a good way of raising awareness as well. And here's my example of a media pitch. I did send a different media pitch, and I was told, please do one that is centered on ecumenical stories. So this is the story that I saw on the website, and I felt, oh, I could possibly, let me see what I can do with that. So on the Churches Together in England website, there's a story about the Holy Diocese of Theatra and Great Britain, which I'd never heard of, I have to confess, which is part of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, this diocese, which is based in Britain, I stand to be corrected, Sarah, celebrated its 100th anniversary last year. Now, anniversaries are always great. They have the potential to get media coverage because it's anniversary. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, 50 years, 70 years, 75 years, 100 years. People like doing stories that hang on the anniversary. 100 years, that should be a story everyone would cover. If I had known about it, I would have most probably done something in my magazine. And what was interesting was that this diocese was formed in the aftermath of the Asia Minor catastrophe, again, which I hadn't heard of, but it was Turkish army going and destroying and unfortunately killing Greeks who had settled in Asia Minor. So it's got that history behind it as well. It's also a large church. It's got 120 churches in the diocese, that's throughout the country, serving 700,000 adherents. As far as I'm concerned, these are things that you can hang a good media pitch on. So if you notice from my letter, which is addressed to a BBC reporter, I've tried to give a snapshot of this church, mentioning what it is, its anniversary, why it was formed, and how many churches are in the diocese. I've also mentioned that the patriarch, Bartholomew, he's head of 320 million people. He'll be here for celebrations. And whilst in London, he's going to be attending a prayer breakfast and meet church leaders from other traditions, as well as visit work carried out in the parishes. Media like to do things about churches that are doing work in the community. Because of the cost of living crisis, there are numerous stories at the moment about food banks and the way that churches and community organisations are supporting vulnerable people during this time. I've also added that the diocese does extensive work with young people and supports efforts to end human trafficking and modern slavery. And if you would like to do a story, please do contact me. So when you do a pitch, it's just important to bring out the salient points. That pitch came from a a story that was on CT site that was about 500, 600 words. I think I've reduced it to about 150, because journalists don't often have a lot of time to kind of read things in depth. They just want the salient points that they can pick out. Now, I don't know whether or not they would do this story, but I think that I've given them stuff that they can bite on. I know for definite, most probably the religious department of the BBC would most probably do something. And if the BBC Songs of Praise was, but Michael, you can correct me, was notified in time, it might also be something that they would cover. What else would I do? There'd be other things I would do in order to give the story legs, just in case you know, my chosen media didn't do it. I would write a press release. So as well as doing a media pitch, I would most probably do a press release and send that along with my pitch. I would find within the diocese a case study of someone whose life has been impacted by the diocese. So for instance, if I've got somebody who's a descendant of a victim of the Asia Minor catastrophe who's still part of the church, I most probably would bring them forward to sort of like reminisce of how maybe the church has changed over the years and how it's impacted their life. I should book a professional photographer to take pictures when the Archbishop or the Patriarch is here, get good pictures. And after his visit, I would then do another press release and send it to my various media with the pictures, in the hope that somebody would take that, publish the press release along with the pictures. There's other things that you, I think when you want to engage with media that you should note. You have to make time. Engaging with media is time consuming. And I know that. I've just recently published a book, and you get calls and you have to fit them into everything else that you're doing. So know that it will take time. Know your stuff, particularly if you're contacting the media about a particular area of concern. Be knowledgeable, know what you're talking about. When engaging with media, don't say anything you don't want published. And if asked for a quote, ask the journalist if you can send it by email. And it's always worth creating a media kit of your organization. So if it's an ecumenical organization, the name, what it does, the kind of community things you've done, any awards that you've won, so that when a media gets in contact with you, you've got something already written up that gives people a snapshot, a taste of what your organization's about that you can send to them. And this is my details. Thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Marcia. I either put a question in the chat, or if you'd like to wave your hand either virtually or on the through the little icons on Zoom, please do. You'll obviously need to unmute yourself.
Melis, I've seen Melis has got a raised hand.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. If you write a media pitch, do you send it to like one publication or editorial team only, or you try at the same time different ones?
No, yeah, you try different ones. So that you try different ones. So I've done pitches where I've sent to 7, 8 media outlets. What I do find is that if the media really like a story, they'll get in contact with you straight away. That's my experience. Yeah, so write a good pitch, and hopefully they'll cover your story. And it's good to send it to work out who the story will appeal to, because there's some stories that will be of interest nationally, some regionally, some locally, or some just for the religious press. So kind of like you have to kind of make that decision sometimes.
Marcia, I got a question. I mean, if we haven't got your experience, how do we find an angle? You've mentioned anniversaries are good, people stories are good. Is there any? What? How do you know what's going to grab someone?
I don't think you necessarily know what's going to grab someone, but news is about the unusual, what's unusual, what's different. Like I said, you know, this cost of living crisis, people are looking for stories of people that are helping in the community. The thing about the I can't even pronounce the word, but things to do with ecumenicism, and I've not pronounced it properly, is that it's you have to find the kernel within what you're doing in order to bring out the gold and stuff. So for me, like I said, when I saw that story on the website, I've just picked out, you know, those things. 100th anniversary. The church was born out of suffering. There's 120 churches in this country serving 700,000 people. The key head of that church, that number's 320 million, is coming over here. To me, those are kind of gold in that story that people will kind of pick up on and stuff. You have to kind of you gauge it, and sometimes it's good if you've got somebody that you know is in the media, you know, befriend them, ask them, what do you think about this?
Thank you, Marcia. We've got a question from Stephen who's saying, are particular niche or trade journals or publications useful, or should we concentrate on the widest possible release? So should you go narrow or should you go wide?
It always depends on what the story is. Sometimes, you know, there's kind of quirky stories that capture people's interest. So last month, there was a story about a guy from the Midlands, a bus driver Asian bus driver who loved his job so much, he did a video of it. It made the national news because it was a little bit, it was quirky, and it had a feel, you're smiling, it had a feel good, there was a feel good story to it. So it's sometimes you just kind of throw out anything. I know that sounds very glib or whatever, but sometimes you don't know what people are going to gravitate to. I was surprised to see that story on the 6 o'clock news. However, I thought it was really, really good to see it on the 6 o'clock news because all the news had been negative.
Thank you, Marcia. I'd just say to everybody who's joined us, you've got Marcia and Michael who are experts here. If you've got a story that you're wrestling with, when we do the Q&A at the end, if you want some ideas about your story, get ready to pitch it to our experts and see how they would approach it. So you've got the opportunity to get a bit of expert consultation. So thank you, Marcia. I'll hand over now to Michael, who is the executive chair of the Religion Media Centre. Come in, Michael. Are you okay? Are you ready to?
Yeah,
to
I'm here.
off?
Yeah, I was enjoying
Fabulous.
Marcia's presentation. I think hopefully what I'm going to say is going to be complementary to Marcia. She picked up on some of the themes that I'll be referring back to as well. But I've got a slightly different take on this. Hopefully you'll find it useful. What I want to do is share my screen, don't I? Let's see if I can do that without too much fuss. There, are we seeing that?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, good. Okay. So I want to make you lot go small. There you are. So I don't know where you all are in relation to the media, because as I'm going to be saying a bit later, the most important thing about communication is to understand your audience. So I'm going to give you the kind of training short form that we do with bishops in the Church of England and other religious leaders, not just from the Christian churches, but from other faith groups as well. And hopefully it'll resonate with you a bit. If I'm teaching my granny to suck eggs, I do apologize, but hopefully you'll find some of this useful and maybe a bit enlightening. And I think it's different to Marcia. We have a very different take, which I'll explain to you as we go on. So I am Michael Wakelin. I was head of religious broadcasting at the BBC for a few years, and I was at religious broadcasting for many years, working on Radio 1, 2, 3, 4, television, documentaries, and Songs of Praise, which I was series producer for quite a long time, and ended up at running the department, which was, I compare it now, looking back on it, to trying to run up an escalator that's coming very fast down the other way. It really was an extremely tough job. And we had some successes and some failures, but I left in 2010, and it was only really when I left religious broadcasting that I fully got to grips with the religious makeup of the country, and particularly my work in interfaith, like Marcia's, has been very extensive and enjoyable. So I run a thing called the Religion Media Centre, which I put the website there. Do please log on. You get a free news bulletin into your inbox every morning for breakfast, which gives you all the top stories from around the world, really, in terms of faith. We set up in about 2015, and we are there to help journalists cover religious stories, because we know journalists are busy and they're not necessarily terribly religiously literate, and they need help to cover religious stories. So we're there. We're non proselytizing. We're non-confessional. We just say religion is important and you need to understand it. So we are there, and we're doing well. We had a big story recently that made several of the papers. We get covered by the BBC quite a bit, and we have a weekly press briefing, which is joined by numerous journalists to shed light on stories in a bit more depth. Anyway, I want to talk about the way we approach the media, which I think is really important, because we don't blame the media. With all the training that I do, there's a general groundswell of feeling, particularly from non-Christians, actually. I think Christians have got very used to the fact we're treated very badly by the media. But other faith groups seem to think they perhaps deserve some sort of special treatment. And then when they don't get it, they blame the media. They think it's their fault. They don't understand us. You know, they don't listen to us. But we don't blame them. We concentrate on what we can do about getting our message across, not criticizing the way that they cover us. Media is a fantastic opportunity, as I think Marcia has been making very clear. We're all broadcasters now. There was a time when you had to wait for a journalist to come knocking on your door or phoning you up in order to get your story out there. But of course, we've got social media, and it's a fantastic opportunity. And as religious leaders like you are, we really have to use it. It's an opportunity we cannot refuse, especially in the Christian context, where we're in the business of spreading good news. We shouldn't expect to be puffed or soft-soaped. We're going to get the kind of media treatment that we deserve, I think, on the whole. And no journalist is going to give you an easy ride because you're religious. So our job, and what we help people to do, is to understand the media, its role, and what it's trying to do. And my colleague Ruth is very defensive of journalists. She's been a journalist all her life. And she will always say that journalists are there essentially trying to tell the truth. It may not always seem so, but that is what they want to do. And they want to do it quickly. They want to do it succinctly. And it's our job to understand what they're trying to do, and then we can communicate with them better. As leaders, you're expected to communicate. And the way we do this training, and I'm partly using this as a sales pitch, because it's the training day that this is based on is a whole day, and it's got the theory, but most importantly, it's got the practice. So we put everyone who comes, we normally have 5 or 6 for the day. We put them through their paces, interviewing them. And not everyone's going to be interviewed on the Today program or, you know, other stations, but the technique of being interviewed and preparing for interview covers all the bases in terms of the skills of good communication. So we use the lens of the interview situation to test people in how good their communication skills are, but actually it applies to your social media posts, your podcasts, whatever else it is you're doing. All comes down to your preparation. And we can do that by looking at the way people are interviewed. So understanding the media then, this is important to get in the mind of the journalist so you know who you're dealing with. It is just a fact that media people are twice more likely to be irreligious. That doesn't mean that they are necessarily religiously illiterate. I'm a big fan of Jeremy Bowen, having worked with him a bit. And he's not the slightest bit religious, but he's very religiously literate, and he knows his way around the issues he's covering extremely well without professing any sort of faith. So just because you're not religious doesn't mean you're religiously literate. However, it does, I think, bring in the fact that a lot of people who are irreligious, especially in the media, perhaps, they're quite cynical towards religion. So you have to be aware of that, and just bear in mind they're not going to be giving you that kind of kind, smiling understanding that you might get from a religious person. Journalists are under tremendous pressures of time and space, and religious people love using too many words. So there's a clash there. They have a 2-minute piece to do for a bulletin. They have 200 words to write for an article. They've got a short Twitter space to write their Twitter feed. So we need to help them with that by not using so many words. They're under tremendous pressures of time and space. Religious people, and particularly theologians that I've worked with over the years, they're very cynical of the soundbite culture. But in actual fact, Jesus was fantastically good at soundbites. Turn the other cheek, give unto Caesar, forgive 70 times 7. He was a tabloid journalist's dream when it comes to soundbites. And we shouldn't be frightened of them either, because they're a very good way of communicating succinctly. People have a short attention span, and my goodness, that's got even worse, I think, in recent years. So they're not going to stay listening to you for very long. I had a script sent to me just the other day from a certain senior cleric, who shall remain nameless, but their opening line was saying, I love the paintings of Spencer. And they were going on to do a pause for thought script. And I'm thinking, the Radio 2 audience don't know who this artist is. They'd certainly never heard of the painting he was trying to describe. And, people don't stay with you very long unless you grab them. So grab them quickly. People complain that the news is, as Marcia is hinting, actually, that, so much of it is bad news. And of course it is. Plane lands safely at Heathrow is marvelous, but it's not going to make the headlines. Plane crashes into the South China Sea is going to make the headlines. Bishop preaches intriguing sermon on the 3 persons of the Trinity is not going to be very interesting. Bishop found in 3 persons in a bed romp is going to be interesting, because that's what people want to hear about. So there is always that clash between bad news and good news. But as Marcia was indicating, we've got great good news stories, and we need to tell them. Now, I'm executive producer of Pause for Thought. I've mentioned that already. There are 3 Pause for Thoughts every day. I'm always looking for good contributors if you want to contact me. But one thing I really sit on them about is using religion speak. We're terribly easily lured into this. And other faiths are as well. But I think where possible, avoid it, because you haven't got time to explain it. Find new ways of expressing yourself, which is going to grab people and not slip into Christian cliche in our case. And I've got this great quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which I found recently, which I will share with you. It's not for us to prophesy the day when people will once more ask God that the world be changed and renewed. But when that day arrives, there will be a new language, perhaps quite non-religious, but liberating and redeeming, as was Jesus's language. It'll shock people. It'll shock them by its power. It'll be the language of a new truth, proclaiming God's peace with the world. And I love that. And he was writing that in 1945? And he had this vision that, we need to find a new language, because the language that is out there so often used by religious people is just not cutting through. I often think of, and tell my Pause for Thought contributors to think of Doris in Doncaster, who's never been to church. She thinks religious people are all a bit mad. And when we start going on about religion, she switches off. But grab her with a new language and we can perhaps start to communicate in a better way. So understanding the mind of the journalist is important, and understanding what they want. I think Marcia's done a pretty good job on this already, actually, but they want a story, obviously. With news, the clue is in the title. It's new. They want information imparted to them in easily accessible forms where they can grab it. Facts and figures are hugely useful. I mean, how often do news stories start with a new survey that's been done? So if you can provide good, interesting facts and figures, that's a really good start. I was someone sent me an idea for a radio series just yesterday. They've been doing a survey on friendship, and it transpires that 30% of the people in the UK don't have a best friend, and 10% of people in the UK have no friends at all. That's a great stat, and immediately your interest is piqued and you want to find out more. So it is amazing how people don't understand what interesting is. When we were doing songs of praise, we used to go to a particular area and find out interesting stories from the local clergy. And one chap sent in this it was a little paragraph about one of his congregants who'd been worshipping in the church for 60 years. Well, quite interesting. So we sent, is there anything else? And he said, well, she keeps chickens. It does depend a bit what you understand interesting to be, but to get a journalist's attention, it needs to be pretty interesting. Illuminating, obviously. Unusual, of course, because it's new news. Controversial. Well, you can kind of generate your own controversy rather than waiting for it to come and hit you. But I've got a slide at the end about crisis management, which we'll think a little bit about when you are caught out. But controversy, is going to be attractive, and if you can manage that, that's a good way to get journalists' attention. Relevant and timely, of course. Okay, so this is the big question, really, and I think everyone should think this. Everyone in the business of communication, before they stand up and say anything, even in your own pulpits or your own classrooms, who is your audience? Who is actually listening to you? And you need to, therefore, you can then make it relevant to them. And this is really important on Radio 2 with doing Pause for Thought, not talking about obscure artists. Or another person's script started with, when we were visiting our villa in Tuscany. I'm thinking, Radio 2 people don't have villas in Tuscany, by and large. If you're going to grab them, talk to them properly resonate with things that are relevant to them. So there's some pictures here of the sorts of people you might be talking to. There's a man doing the washing up with no head. But, people driving along, people doing the ironing, if you're on the radio, think about them, or you're writing your press release for them, or your blog, or whatever your social media is. Who are the people you're communicating with? And that's a really important question. Marcia's already mentioned lots of the social media platforms we have, and you'll be familiar with them, I'm sure. So this is one of the toolkits we give people. This is a really good take out this. Your key messages. So when you've got your project you're trying to promote, think about what it is you want to say about it. What are you trying to say? To whom? Let's think about who your audience is. And then you want to think probably of 3 key messages about the story that are going to grab people. And you rank them in priority so that when you're being interviewed, you make sure you get your most important one out first. Like politicians, you've heard them do it. They say what they've got to say by getting that into the first question. You shouldn't avoid the question you're asked, but make sure that your first key message is readily available to you and you've got supporting arguments for it. You've got stats to back it up. And Marcia mentioned this, but use stories. Jesus used stories. It is by far and away the best way to get information across. Colourful language can be very helpful. I'm not talking swear words, I'm talking descriptive words that will make it appealing for a journalist. And this is a phrase that I think is great. Take me there, make me care. So when you're trying to attract a journalist to your story, your project launch, whatever it is, you want them to really feel it. And you do that by telling stories of real people, by describing what it is you're actually doing, what it looks like, the kind of touchy-feely stuff. And if you take them there, they're going to care about it. Now, I'm just going to finish. I might look briefly at the crisis slide, but I wanted to tell you about this story that happened for me at New Year, just to show you how easy it is to get a story on the air. Okay, so my brother-in-law, who's the man in the cap in the middle there, behind the table with the cloth cap, he's Merlin. Tremendous chap. And when we got there to celebrate New Year with him and my sister, he told us that they were planting acorn taken from the famous oak tree under which Robin Hood and his merry men sat in Sherwood Forest. Because there was a man in the village, this is Salthouse in North Norfolk, if you know North Norfolk at all, near Cly. And there's a man in Salthouse who works at Sherwood Forest, and he'd nurtured this acorn for 4 years, and it was now ready to plant in the soil. So Merlin told me this story, and I thought that's interesting. I said, have you got any press coverage? And he said they hadn't thought about it. So I went out there in the pouring rain, and some of the villagers had gathered. I took that photograph. And I took a photograph of the boy on the left there who cut the ribbon, which Merlin had put around the tree. I took a picture of the tree. And I thought, well, that's an interesting little story for the local paper. In this case, the North Norfolk News. So I then worked out what my key messages were. So members of the Salthouse community gathered by Salthouse Church on New Year's Eve for a special tree planting of the coronation oak. So Merlin was planting this. Originally, it was going to be for the Queen's Jubilee, but they changed it to the coronation oak for King Charles. So the sapling had been reared from a seed taken from, this is the most interesting thing, taken from the most famous tree in the country, the major oak in Sherwood Forest, the tree that sheltered Robin Hood and his merry men. So lots of colourful things there to attract a journalist's attention. Reg Harris, he's the arborist who had cultivated the acorn. And the two little interesting stats here, facts, it could live to be 1,000 years old and will accommodate up to 1,000 types of invertebrates. So that's quite nice. Merlin, my brother-in-law, who had the idea to plant the tree, welcomed the members of the community and said that quotes are really good. This is a really nice quote. It's got a bit of rhythm to it. Although many of us will not see it in its grand state, if it is cherished, it will survive for a long, long, long time. Nice quote. Also, the boy who cut the ribbon wasn't the youngest boy. The youngest boy in the party, when Merlin handed him the scissors to cut the ribbon, he said, I'm not allowed to use big scissors, my teacher said. So I threw that into the email that I sent to Stuart Anderson, who I found in the newspaper under the North Norfolk News editor. So I emailed him, had his email address. I sent him those key facts. I sent him the photograph, and my sister rang up because it didn't come out immediately. She rang me up when I got back to Cheshire, and she said, oh, we made it into the paper. And I said, oh, well, the North Norfolk News. She said, oh, no, not the North Norfolk News, the Eastern Daily Press, which is one of the biggest papers in the country regionally. And I said, oh, well, presumably we're on page 12 or 13 or something. She said, no, page 3. And there it is. So all that was just a simple photograph, picking out what your key messages were and sending it off to the journalist. He never thanked me, by the way. Anyway, just a quick word about crisis comms, because this is something that comes up a lot. If you are suddenly caught out, there are things you can do, and I'd love to do this training with you and really do it properly. But the first thing, if you're caught in a crisis, is to buy time. And before you're caught in a crisis, you need to work out who's in your decision tree. So you're not suddenly caught with your trousers down, not literally, hopefully, but where you actually know who's going to make the decisions about the subject in your organization. You've got time to prep. You've got time to delay any journalist ringing you up saying, we've just heard that such and such has happened in your church. You say to them, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying. Give me an hour and we'll come back to you with some sort of answer. So it's very important you buy that time and you prep with your team and think about how you're going to communicate your messaging clearly. So don't panic. So quick summary, I think all media engagement is about being prepared. And some of that you can do in advance, but also you can think about your key messages, you can practice with your team. Always think about who your audience is. What am I trying to say? Get your 3 key messages out there. Be succinct and concise, because people have a short attention span, so do journalists. And perhaps the last countercultural thing might be enjoy it. Have you heard someone on the media not enjoying being interviewed? It sounds awful. But if you can enjoy it, that's so much the better. And you'll enjoy it more if you've had our training and taken some of that advice. I'm going to stop sharing there. Is that all right?
Thank you very much, Michael. That's great. Has anybody got any questions for Michael? Anything they would, anybody wrestling with their own Doris and Doncaster? Yeah. Stephen.
I'm just wondering to what extent you explain so much that you lose the thrust of the story sometimes. for instance, we have a parish nurse and it's lovely and it's open to all and we don't care who comes along. We have a registered nurse who has given up of her time. I think she's bonkers, but she's given up one day a week to talk to the people in the parish. Now that was met with, oh, well, you're circumventing the local system. You're hoping to dismantle the NHS and it's us against them. So to what extent do you try to sort of answer the question before it's posed, shall I say?
Michael, do you want to take that?
Well, yes, I think I know what you're saying. It's, I mean, you want to engage the journalist, don't you? Rather than, are you saying you can give them too much of a fait accompli rather than letting them do some work?
I don't want to hand them the stick to beat me with, but I also want to possibly look at some obstacles and objections before they arise.
All right. So what's the story you're trying to sell?
Well, that we have a parish nurse who gives one day of their week to give medical advice, signposting advice to anyone that can either make it to the church or can contact the church in any other means.
Yeah, that's a nice story. That's quite a nice story. Well, that's a decent headline. I think you'd want to expect some questions about the appropriateness of that, I guess, and whether she would be crossing any boundaries. I thought that might be a bit of an issue because obviously, you know, dealing out faith in relation to medical care is tricky, isn't it? People have got into trouble with that. But that's the sort of thing you could talk through with your team, as it were, with your immediate colleagues, you know, your family, and make sure that you've thought through those answers. But presumably you've got a fairly robust reply to that.
Yes, that we're simply not, that it's open to everyone. And then the second question arises and we refer them to our previous answer, that it's for everyone. Yeah.
Well, certainly, I think perhaps a nice photograph of her at work, obviously not showing the faces of the patients, but that would be quite nice. A nice quote from some of the patients who've been helped by her and how valuable it is to them that they can do this. Yeah, I think that's a nice story. It'd be interesting to see where that one goes.
Yes, so, and an assurance that it's not private healthcare under a different form, as I was accused.
Yeah. That's a good tale. It's the sort of thing they'd be interested in on 5 Live.
Thank you.
I think they talk about. I'm always texting 5 Live. It's incredible how they put your text out. Honestly, sat there at the breakfast table, texted something in, and then Rachel Burden's reading it out a couple of minutes later.
Marcia, is there anything you want to add to Michael's advice to Stephen there about his parish nurse?
I think Michael answered that question very well. You answered it well. Get a picture, get a nice quote. Yeah. I think he answered.
Great, lovely. Has anybody else got any stories that they're wrestling with, that they'd like to get the expertise of our speakers on? How would they pitch the story?
Just while they're thinking, Sarah, I noticed someone said, "Are you planning to do some of your training courses?" We'd love to do training courses with you. We haven't worked through Sarah yet, but as I say, if you can get 6 people together from a 6 or 7 or 5 or 6 together, we can come and do training with you. It does cost a bit, but we're very cheap compared to other training things I've noticed. So we'd love to do it with you. It's really, everyone really enjoys it because we give you such a hard time, and we allow you to make mistakes. And you know, I always throw in a curved ball question to people in the latter half of the day when they're getting a bit more used to it, where we say something like, so these tend to be chairs of the district in the Methodist Church, or bishops. We say, so we've just heard that someone in your congregation, in one of your churches, the organist has run off with the choir mistress. And one person replied to that, "Oh, not again." Very funny. But we put people on the spot and make them think on their feet. You know, there's been some horrible attack at the church or something like that. You know, it's not always jokey, but it's good to see people struggle.
Michael, I'm going to come back to you in a bit because I want you to talk about what you're planning to do in the cities. You're going to be doing some regional stuff, which might be of interest to some of our folks. But Anna, you've got a question. I think you've got your hand up, Anna, from the Council for Lutheran Churches.
Yeah, thank you both for very good presentations. I really enjoyed that. I think the Lutherans in this country are a super tiny minority. Like when you think about Christians, we're a tiny fraction of the 1% of other when you look at the statistics. And the council, for example, is turning 75 this year, and I'm doing a little project about the women who've had leadership positions in the councils ever since the 1960s, which is pretty cool. We're a refugee community largely, so women got involved from the earliest days. And the first ever female bishop in the UK across Christian denominations was Lutheran in the 2010s, sort of, 2014, I think she started. And I don't know whether that's interesting enough. Nobody will have heard of Lutherans in this country. When we did a project where Melis went out to King's Cross and asked, do you know what a Lutheran is? And people just didn't have any idea. They thought of Martin Luther King, they thought of the TV series Luther, but they had no idea what Lutheran in a sort of Christian context meant. So I don't know whether you think it's worth actually trying to reach out when people don't even know what kind of group we are.
I would say definitely. I mean, your church is, sorry, I get a little bit excited about the church, but your church is it's a historic church. Doesn't Martin Luther come from your church?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so if it was me, I would be thinking 75, celebrating the church here, but it would also have to be awareness creating exercise. Did you know that the Lutheran Church was founded, I think it was founded, but you have to to correct me, I'm on my PR mode, was founded by Martin Luther, who revolutionized Christianity. I think, for me, I think you've got, you'd obviously have to talk a bit more, but you've got great things about your church. And if your church was the first church to ordain, or one of the first churches to ordain women bishops, but I think the Church of England, the Anglican Church in America did that. But if it's one of the first in Europe or whatever, those are the things that you bring to the fore. So maybe when you're doing your celebration, you might want to create an information sheet about the Lutheran Church, because it's a historic church. It's changed the course of Christianity.
Thank you.
Also, the Religion Media Centre does do fact sheets on all sorts of aspects of all religions. I'm not sure we've got a fact sheet on the Lutheran Church, so perhaps you could come back to me about that. But I think one way of attracting attention is, Marcia is absolutely right about your church is very interesting. But if you're doing something in order to make it relevant and timely, you could, for instance, do a survey which produces some interesting results. You could launch, a campaign against poverty. You could join with other organizations to raise your profile, to give yourself a nice press release. I mean, you can't really do a press release about the fact that your church was the first to ordain bishops, 20 years ago, whenever it was. But if you've got something that's ongoing now, and then you could attach the other interesting things about your denomination to the press release as part of the facts that back it up, then that's a way of doing it too. Surveys are a very good way of attracting attention.
Okay, thank you.
Are they cheap surveys?
Well, they don't have to be very expensive. It depends who you use. I know the Church Action on Poverty, that some of you might be aware of, has recently done its own research. I think they got a small amount of funding to do some research into the churches in Manchester, where it is evident that we did a Zoom press briefing about it yesterday. It's the churches in the poorer areas are being shut down much more than in the more wealthy areas of Manchester. It's a shocking fact, I think. And we got a whole press briefing out of it and quite a bit of copy too. So I think they did that with a small grant.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like Marcia and Michael's expertise on a story that they are wrestling with? I don't want to have to use churches. Oh, Brian, you saved me. Churches Together in Cheadle Hulme was about to get a mention, which we want to keep under wraps.
I'm the Baptist Leader for Lancashire. I get called onto the radio quite often. I was called on New Year's Day to give my perspective on the future of the church in the new year. I was very, very poorly. I still did it, but I definitely didn't do my best. Should I have turned it down, Michael, do you think?
I don't think you should ever turn down a media opportunity.
Well, that was the point, you see.
I think, well, I mean, it would be interesting just how poorly you were. Poor you. No, I'm glad you did it. You should always, because the thing is, you see, for a journalist, because we've already, you know, Marcia already mentioned, but I mentioned too, the fact that they're busy. You know, they've got deadlines to keep. They think, well, let's ring up Brian Drury, see what he does, and if you let them down, then they won't ring you again. If you're there, yes, I'm here. Yes, I'd love to do it. You know, give me 2 minutes, I'll get myself together, and then blow your nose, touch pastels, and take a paracetamol and do it. Yeah, I would.
Well, I had my 3 points listed, like you say. I'm not sure I was that clear on what I was saying. But I know Joe Wilson, Radio Lancashire, he does ring me up, or he catches me at meetings. He just sticks a microphone in front of my face and says, "What you got to say, Brian?" Something.
Yeah. You're a renter gob as far as they're concerned. You're obviously a good one.
I must be. Thank you. Anyway, no, it's just as long as because that bothered me a little. I wasn't responding as I should have done to Joe. You know,
they might not come to you again if you let them down.
Oh, you will.
Akpo, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, quick one. Yeah, I'm based in Bradford. On Christmas Day, my church fed about 350 people. Max and Michael, how will you want me to approach that story, to get that story to the media?
What's the story?
On Christmas Day, my church fed about 350 people. Christmas lunch.
Well, it's a bit late now for coverage of this.
No,
year,
I mean, just if you were to get that story.
Well, that's a very nice story. It's a heartwarming story. Christmas is a quiet time. That's the sort of thing that if you've got a couple of really nice photographs, a couple of nice quotes from people who have been fed and what a good meal it was, maybe someone from the council who approved it, then you could do a nice one side of A4 press release where you say that, and then you kind of have to you have to just let them see whether they think it's interesting or not. You can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But you've got to take the horse to water in the first place. So that's a nice story. I would have thought you could have made something of that if you'd thought it through. What are the 3 key things? Nice photograph. Photographs always help with local press. Local radio might have been interested in that. So it's about getting to know your journalists. I mean, when I was doing the North Norfolk Post thing, they're listed, their email addresses in there, for heaven's sake. Your local radio, have a chat with them, see who the religious coverage does, the religious coverage for your local radio, because you can bet your life there will be someone. Did you say you're from Bradford? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yes.
If I'm given the chance to talk about our cities project, I can come back to you.
I'll come back to you, Marcia. Anything to add on for Akpo's query there about his Christmas lunch?
Yeah, Michael said it all. I would just add that you do the story, send out the information the following day, because it is over the Christmas period. It is a slow news time, and you're likely someone's likely to publish that story, whether it's local press or religious press. Premier Radio, I think that should be on every. Yeah. They should get the contact details of the news desk at least for Premier Radio, which is always looking on the lookout for Christian stories that can go on their website or be featured on air. It's a good story. 350 people. It's a nice story.
Yeah. What did they eat?
That's what I was thinking.
See, the menu is your colour there, isn't it? No, they all fantastic jerk turkey or whatever it was.
All kinds of food, yeah.
Lovely.
Proper Christmas lunch, yes.
Proper, yeah.
Thank you, Akpo. Melis, I'm going to come to you in just a minute, but I want to take Rosie's question out of the chat. Rosie's for representing Church Action on tax justice, and they're going to hand in a petition calling for a wealth tax to tackle inequality at Downing Street. Rosie says, I imagine that petition hand-ins are often pitched to journalists. Any thoughts on making this more attention-grabbing? Marcia, Michael, any thoughts on how to make this stand out?
Go on, Marcia.
Take a picture, send it to news desk, maybe also tweet it out and tag some news people. I've never done a story like that, so but it's to do with tax, maybe to find some angle. I'm just talking off the top of my head here, to do with tax Is it that the tax is too much? Is it too little? What's the angle with regards to tax?
We're calling for a tax on the country's richest 1%.
Okay, I'm sure that will garner some coverage. Maybe to list some really rich people that don't pay any tax, or have, pay minimal tax, like Amazon or something. I don't know.
What are your stats related to the actual tax burden? I mean, how much are people suffering? There must be some really interesting stats that you've got that you can call on and make them compelling. This is tax justice. So yeah, there's things like, isn't it, that the top 1% of the country have 90% of the wealth or whatever it is. I mean, I'm sure there are some facts and figures you could throw in there to make your press release particularly interesting, plus some quotes from people too. You might even have you got some celebrity with it. That always helps. If you've got someone.
We've got the support of the Patriotic Millionaires, who are a group of rich people who want to pay more taxes. So we could have a quote from them.
Yeah, that could be very good. Yeah, I'd never heard of them before, so I'm quite keen on that. It's a nice idea. Yeah, so making it stand out is key, isn't it? And Marcia's right. Photograph certainly helps, but quotes, figures, stats, facts and figures, all those kinds of things to pump it up the agenda, to make it easily grabbable. Amazing.
It's interesting that they've got millionaires who are supporting the case, supporting the petition. Never heard of that before.
You'd be amazed how many press releases I've seen where the interesting fact is on page 4. But it shouldn't have 4 pages of press release, and the interesting fact should be in the first sentence and the second sentence.
Yeah.
Important guidance there. Rosie, do you want to come back on that at all?
No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Milis, I'm going to come to you next.
Yes, I have been working in religious media or in public media as a religious editor for many, many years. And I remember that most boring press releases and pieces of information is about conferences. Like people come together, they sit there, and they think it's very super important. And then as a journalist, you try to figure out what's the story there. And now I'm in the opposite situation, where I have to kind of sell a conference, which is super important for the church, but probably very boring for press. So how to sell a conference? The background is it's a Lutheran World Federation. They have pre-assembly in Oxford, which is a big gathering, a lot of bishops, many guests, and so on. How to make a conference appealing?
Great question. I wish I'd asked that, Miles, because we have lots of events at CTE which I'd love people to cover. Marcia, do you want to kick off with that, or Michael? How do you sell a conference, which is important to you?
Conferences are, in terms of attracting media attention, it's always going to be down to who the speakers are and the subject matter of the conference. Is it dealing with something that is topical, that a lot of people are experiencing? I'm from a community that does lots of conferences as well. Are you going to have a special international speaker? Is it Bill Gates or something? It's all going to be the coverage that you get will depend on the elements within the conference. So that's going to be the speaker, the subject matter, and what's actually going to be taking part. Have you got a bishop who's was persecuted? I don't mean that, but I'm just saying the unique elements of the speaker. What's their life about? What have they done? And you can use individuals who are going to be speaking to kind of generate some interest in the conference. That's what I do when I'm promoting conferences, because I do it all. I'm doing it all the time. But I find that in the Black Pentecostal community, the conferences that generate the most interest will be one with speakers that they've never heard before, or speakers that are very popular that have never been here, or it's dealing with a subject matter that is not really spoken about a lot.
Yes, it's that who's saying what is the key thing, I think. What are they actually saying? Anything very powerful? I was shipped out to Bali recently to attend the R20, and which was the religious gathering before the G20. And I was there to help generate some press interest. And it was really hard because they've got all these world religious leaders with hats and beards from all over the place came together. And they all basically, they said, we're a bit worried about the climate crisis. You know, it just wasn't going to get any attention anywhere because there was nothing dramatic being said. So you need to think, what coverage do you actually want to get? What is the message that your key speakers are talking about? And you'll notice Synod got massive media coverage, but it was because it's all about sex. The media thinks that's all the church talks about. I point out that there are 6 verses about homosexuality in the Bible. There are 2,800 about justice. And what we spend our time talking about. So it is really hard. I mean, there's no use pretending it's easy to get journalists interested in the conference, because they're not. So, but it's about pumping up as best you can the things that are being said. If they're not saying anything very interesting, you're not going to get covered. Simple as that.
Thank you. Stephen, you got a question in the chat. When a funder wants to feature you on their website, are there any tips so that you don't look like the Grateful Surf?
Do
you want to just explain a bit more, Stephen?
Yes, I'll take money from all legitimate sources, of course, and I'll happily take money off the council. Would I like to be automatically photographed with a councillor who, by the way, might be up for re-election in May? Possibly not. Would I like my picture taken in front of a 5-foot check? Possibly not. Would I like my picture taken in front of a website for a funder who doesn't particularly share my views? I'll take their money by all means. I'm just worried about reputation and the public approval.
Well, I'm the exec chair of the Religion Media Centre, so I'm responsible for fundraising, and yeah, it's a very difficult area. Professor David Ford, who was head of the Cambridge University Interfaith Programme, Regius Professor of Divinity at Cambridge, he used to say that you could sanctify money wherever it came from, because he took some big amounts of money from, the Middle East, for example, but he always reckoned that if you did good things with it, it was all right. With the Religion Media Centre, because we're independent, because we're fiercely non-confessional, we don't promote religion, we have to be very careful, because there are some foundations that do have religious links that want to give us money, but we always say to them, you're not going to have any influence over what we do. We're not going to name you, but if you want to give us money, that's okay. But we would refuse money from people who are wanting to proselytize. And that's, I've got trustees. I appointed trustees who I thought were really nice and friendly, but actually they're really fierce. So, I'd make sure your governance is sound and you're getting good advice from your trustees, the people around you, to make sure that you are keeping your integrity and you're not becoming part of someone's re-election campaign. It's a good question.
Thank you, Stephen. So I've picked out a few things to think about from today. It seems that I've got 3 Ps, which is always useful. Planning, we need to spend some time working out what our messages are, what our audience is, who our audience is, and just cultivating those relationships with the journalists. I think it's fair to say your first story that you pitch won't get picked up, but that leads on to my second P, which is persistence. It does take energy, but building those relationships, I think, is worth it for when you get your stories picked up. And we've talked a lot about the sort of preparation and professionalism, my third P today, about writing that pitch, making sure that the key messages are there at the beginning of your press release or your pitch, and really thinking about what those hooks are that are going to help you get your story into the media. Marcia, I'll give you a moment to think whether you've got any sort of final summing up comments. Michael, could you tell us about the work that the Religion Media Centre does regionally? Because I think that will be of interest, your city's projects. I think that will be of interest to some of the people on the call today.
Sorry, you've probably heard enough from me. I'll be brief. But last year, we ran a program which we called 5 Cities to start with, because we found out that local journalists are really frustrated that they don't get religious stories. They want them because they got airtime to fill and column inches to fill. And the religious communities locally were all really frustrated that the media wasn't paying them any attention. I've received some of that from you on this call this morning. So we thought, why don't we bring the 2 factions together? So we went to Manchester, Leeds, Plymouth, Birmingham, Nottingham, and we brought together the local news editors, top people like the editor of North West Tonight in Manchester, for instance, top journalists, brought them together with people from the religious communities, not the normal hats and beards, not the usual normal suspects, but actually young people, people who are really active in the community from the different faith groups. We brought them together, got them to talk to each other, got them to exchange emails, gave them some samosas and nice cups of tea, and it's incredible, the result. We had something like 97% said they now felt more comfortable with talking to the media, or vice versa, talking to the religious communities. It just worked. And this year we've got another chance of funding for this, and we're going to Bradford. As I mentioned, Akpo, we're coming to Bradford. Look me out next Tuesday, 10 o'clock, Cathedral. We've got a meeting in the chapter house. And we're going to Bradford, we're going to Liverpool, we're going to Coventry. I can't remember the others, but we're going to do the same thing again. Bring the media editors together, news editors, journalists, social media people together with the religious groups, get them to talk to each other. It's magic. Please look out for it.
Thank you, Michael. Marcia, any sort of final thoughts from you?
I think anybody who's interested in engaging the media needs to go along to what Michael is doing. You shouldn't be frightened of the media. You should understand it. It's a great tool to use to amplify what you do, to raise awareness of what you do. And I say, as somebody, like I said, who worked on street pastors, it's because of the media coverage that street pastors grew, because the media were interested in it. People heard about it. People wanted to join it. We are Christians. We're about preaching the gospel and sharing the good news. And the media is a great medium to share it with. So I would just encourage everybody online, work on understanding the media. You know, Michael really gave some interesting insights as to the kind of stories that they are interested in. So whatever you're doing, just kind of look through that lens. Is it different? Is it unusual? Is it controversial, etc.? And pitch it in that way. And remember, journalists, we're always looking for stories. I mean, I do PR, but I edit a magazine. We are always looking for stories, interesting people to cover. You know, put it out there. If they don't take that story, they may take another one. But don't be frightened of the media. It's a tool that God wants you to use in order to let the world know what he's doing.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you, Milis, for sitting in the hot seat and looking after the tech for us today. We'll be sending the slides from Marcia and Michael out to you probably at the beginning of next week. We have recorded today's webinar and the other 2 webinars. So if you missed those, you will be able to catch up. That was the art of storytelling and the art of spoken word. And they will be on the our friends at the Council for Lutheran Churches are going to be putting them on their social media, but we'll make sure if you follow CTE that you know where to get hold of those. So thank you very much. And I hope you found today useful. I'm going away to think about how to pitch churches together in Cheadle Hume's litter pick for the coronation. And all the best to you all, and good luck with getting your stories onto the local airwaves and into the press. Thank you very much to Michael and Marcia. Stay well, everybody, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.